All right, welcome everybody. This is another installment of the comprehensive yet informal study of critique of pure reason. Today, I'm here with Patrick. Um,
Hello, that's me.
that is Patrick, and we are studying this part today on the difference between analytic and synthetic judgments. We have a new microphone, which is cool. Audio quality should be better. We also have a webcam in case we want to write anything on the board. I don't think we're going to do that today. We're kind of saving that for when we have in-person people, or maybe even just more generally for like a harder section. But we should be fine with that one today. So we're just going to use this microphone and talk to you about this. So we can start by reading. Do you want to?
Do we want to start by reading? Let's introduce the section first. This is
We can.
on the difference between analytic and synthetic judgments, which is a very basic core distinction in Kant. There's not a lot to argue about here, but it is very important that everyone reading Kant understands this distinction. And I think it's generally pretty well expressed by the first paragraph, and the rest is just examples that sort of reiterate it. So, I'll begin. In all judgments in which the relation of a subject to the predicate is thought, if I consider only affirmative judgments, since the application to negative ones is easy, this relation is possible in two different ways. Either the predicate B belongs to the subject A as something that is covertly contained in this concept A, or B lies entirely outside of the concept A, though to be sure it stands in connection with it. So basically it's saying either anything we say about A is contained within A. The subject-predicate distinction is dog is mammal. So either mammal is contained within the idea of dog, or mammal is outside of dog. In this case, it would be mammal being contained within the idea of dog. But the point is that these are the only two possible relationships between subjects and predicates. So to continue, in the first case, the one where the predicate is implied by the subject, I call the judgment analytic. In the second, synthetic. Analytic judgments, affirmative ones, are thus those in which the connection of the predicate is thought through identity. But those in which this connection is thought without identity are to be called synthetic judgments. One could call the former judgments of clarification and the latter judgments of amplification, since through the predicate the former do not add anything to the concept of the subject, but only break it up by means of analysis into its component concepts, which were already thought in it, though confusedly. While the latter, on the contrary, add to the concept of the subject a predicate that was not thought in it at all, and could not have been extracted from it through any analysis. And then he gives an example here. E.g., if I say, all bodies are extended, then this is an analytic judgment, for I do not need to go beyond the concept I combine with the body in order to find that extension is connected with it, but rather I need only to analyze the concept, i.e., to become conscious of the manifold that I always think in it, in order to encounter this predicate therein. It is therefore an analytic judgment. Basically what he's saying there is all bodies are extended is analytic because the idea of body is defined by having extension in it. In Kant's definition of body, which is very much in the tradition of Descartes, body is extended in space. It takes up space. That's part of what makes it a body. And therefore, by saying body is extended, you aren't adding anything to the notion of body. You're just analyzing what's in a body. Hence, analytic. On the contrary, if I say all bodies are heavy, then the predicate is something entirely different from that which I think in the mere concept of a body in general. This idea here is that the concept of body does not include its heaviness, only its extension in space, and maybe some other properties, but not heaviness among them. And therefore, by saying all bodies are heavy, there's the addition of the idea of heavy, which is outside of body, to body. Hence, synthetic, synthesizing two different notions. The addition of such a predicate thus yields a synthetic judgment. All right.
Yeah, I can continue. Judgments of experience as such are all synthetic. And usually how I go with this is I usually just read the whole thing and I'll comment on it after, but I'll just follow how you've been doing it for consistency's sake. So he's making a claim here about experiential knowledge being synthetic. So experience, right, is not analytic. We can't make judgment of experience that is logically necessary. We could always imagine something about experience being some other way for Kant. If I say, right, like the chair is black, you can't see it, but they're like just like black-looking chairs in the room we're in. This isn't something that blackness is not, so to speak, contained, using the language from before. Blackness is not contained in the notion of chair. Blackness and chair are two separate notions that I'm synthesizing, right? I'm combining. So this is what he means, that all judgments of experience are like this, Kant is saying. And just to explain that, a bolded phrase, bolded sentence.
So I think, to clarify here, judgments of experience as such are all synthetic. They are not synthetic because they are unsure, even though Kant said that they are all unsure. They're synthetic because they involve the combination of two concepts.
Right, yes. There's nothing that you're going to get in experiential knowledge, a posteriori knowledge, which was covered in previous things. Nothing about that kind of knowledge you're going to get. You're not going to get that analytically. You're not going to find things contained in one another and be able to make a judgment of experience. You're going to have to synthesize two different concepts. Thus, you'll get an experiential judgment. So that's the claim Kant is making here, and he's going to explain it further.
Yeah, and just to say, the reason I clarified there is because we don't want to confuse synthetic with like sure, or what Kant calls apodictic.
Yeah.
Because he says that synthetic judgments, some of them are sure, some of them are necessary, and others aren't.
Yes, that's true. Okay, yeah. Yes. Okay. That's a big thing coming up. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, that is an important distinction to make. So keep that in mind. But don't worry about like getting into the details of it. That's coming later for that reason. But anyway, so he explains upon what he means by this. So he says, "For it would be absurd to ground an analytic judgment on experience, since I do not need to go beyond my concept at all in order to formulate the judgment, and therefore need no testimony from experience for that. That a body is extended," going back to this example of bodies being extended. So that a body is extended is a proposition that is established a priori and is not a judgment of experience. For before I go to experience, I already have all the conditions for my judgment in that concept, from which I merely draw out the predicate in accordance with the principle of contradiction, and can thereby at the same time become conscious of the necessity of the judgment, which experience could never teach me. So yes, a priori, he's just elaborating further. This is probably obvious to you if you're following along, but in case you're confused, a priori judgments you're never going to need to appeal to experience for knowledge. And this is a huge take, because in the context of this we're talking about, this is like coming out in the midst of the debate between rationalism and empiricism in modern philosophy, in the history of modern philosophy, where people are trying to determine whether knowledge comes solely from experience or solely from necessary, like what Kant is calling a priori judgments. And I don't think he said it explicitly, at least in this part, but they're both equally knowledge, but they're just different kinds. And for the a priori kind of knowledge, you're never going to need to appeal to experience, as the rationalists uphold. So he's affirming that here. It's for a bit of context there. But then he says, on the contrary, although I do not at all include the predicate of weight in the concept of body in general, the concept nevertheless designates an object of experience through a part of it, to which I can therefore add still other parts of the same experience as belonging with the former. I can first cognize the concept of body analytically through the marks of extension, of impenetrability of shape, etc., which are, like Patrick mentioned, these are like the Cartesian, like criterion of what a body is. which are all thought in this concept. But now I amplify my cognition, and looking back to the experience from which I had extracted the concept of a body, I find that weight is also connected with the previous marks, and I therefore add this synthetically as a predicate to that concept. So this is something else. So a body, in experience, right, in our experience of bodies in the world, we find that, what does he say? He says, weight. Yeah, weight. Weight is something that is synthetically added on, because that's not something, you can't go into a body a priori analytically and find in the definition of a body weight. That's something we synthetically add from experience. That's a judgment of experience that we're adding synthetically. So that's why he's bringing that up here. Because a body has, in this case, a priori judgments and synthetically added on judgments as well from experience. So there are multiple facets of body going on here when we appeal to experience. It is thus experience on which the possibility of the synthesis of the predicate of weight with the concept of body is grounded, since both concepts, though one is not contained in the other, nevertheless belongs together, though only contingently as parts of a whole, namely experience, which is itself a synthetic combination of intuitions. You want to pick up on the next?
Yeah, I would just like to use a different example
Sure.
than Kant's, because I think it's a little obtuse to us in the modern era.
Yeah, we don't really talk about
We don't-
bodies and as extensions. And
Yeah, it's not a
integral-
scientific concept
No,
anymore,
that's a
really.
Cartesian
It's a
concept.
it's a Cartesian concept, and it's difficult to use one because we basically had to make it from scratch. But let's use an example like bachelor. This is something invented by the human mind, and so when I create the concept of bachelor, technically we don't learn what a bachelor is from experience, even though we learn what the word bachelor means, and we learn what the word married means, etc., etc. And so in that sense, we do, what should I say? We don't learn, we learn what a bachelor is, but we don't learn that a bachelor is not married, because by definition, a bachelor is an unmarried person, an unmarried male specifically.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't need to test, basically, to see whether bachelors are unmarried or not. It's ridiculous for me to test such a thing, because by coming up with the concept, I have already included that they are not that they are not married.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that example is also kind of weird, because, of course, we learn what like the word for a bachelor is through experience. But it's a priori in the sense that once
you
I
know
have
what it
this
is, yeah.
concept, yes, I don't need to test.
No, you can analyze it a priori, analytically, and say, okay, yes, analytically, it may, bachelors are unmarried. That's part, it's the concept of unmarriage is contained within bachelor. So that's the a priori part. Now, if you want to follow Kant's line of explanation, I guess you could say here, something that also belongs to bachelors, I guess even to more closely is Kant's weight, right? Because bachelors are people have weight. That's something synthetically added on through experience, whereas them being unmarried is an a priori, like analytically a priori feature. Synthetically, they have weight, right? It's like
Right.
in our experience. We can't go into the concept of bachelor and be like weight, because weight isn't something we have prior to experience. We have to appeal to our experience to get that weight, which Kant says all experience at the end here. It's all experience is it's a synthetic combination of intuition. So there's nothing a priori about anything going on in the experiential world for Kant.
So just to reiterate, in case you got confused somewhere along the line there, analytic basically just means that by definition, if you just look at the concept you're thinking about, the judgment is going to be true because of what it is.
Mhm.
It is what it is. That's what it
Contained in
is.
the concept, yeah.
Yeah. Synthetic means that we need to add something to the concept we're thinking about. So I will continue with the last paragraph here.
Mhm.
But in synthetic a priori judgments, this means of help is entirely lacking. meaning empirical experience, etc. He's saying there's a category of judgment that is combining multiple things together, but it's doing so without any experience.
It's on
a priori. Yes, synthetic a priori judgments. And ultimately, he's actually going to ask, how is this possible? How are synthetic a priori judgments possible? And that's the core question of the critique.
Right, and that's a tough question because if you just think about it, right, you can sort of overgeneralize it being, okay, synthetic is just not necessary. That's the clarification from before earlier, right?
Yes.
You're trying to make. Because here he's talking about, there are, for Kant, and this is controversial, and he's going to, the whole basically rest of this work is going to, in some way or another, deal with explaining what synthetic a priori judgments are and how they're possible. Because I guess to try to definitionally explain, right? So it's like a priori, it's going to be necessary, but it's a necessary judgment that we're not doing analytically. We're combining things that seem arbitrary, but there's something about our cognition which makes them necessary. Even though they're still synthetic. They're not analytic. They're still necessary, but they're not analytic. And that's the tough part to wrap your head around. And Kant's going to give examples in the next piece, which we're going to go over in the next installment. And that might get a little confusing because the accuracy to which, or the accuracy of the examples he gives are under question, but this is something for later. But just, if you can, try to wrap your head around the concept of knowing something is true even though it's not definitionally true. That's what he's getting at here, I think, is the best way to try to explain that.
Right. So I think the only way to make this very, very clear for a first-time reader is to actually skip ahead and tell them what is the synthetic a priori judgments. What examples does he give? He gives mathematical examples is the first kind of example he gives.
Right. I just want to hold off on that because that is confusing and not everyone even agrees that that's
it's
the
true,
case.
but not everyone agrees that synthetic a priori judgments exist at all. There is no example that people would not.
But it doesn't follow that, like, people still it's possible to buy into the concept of synthetic a priori without thinking mathematics is synthetic a priori.
That
so
is true.
That's what I want to avoid.
That is true, but I don't think there's any example that would be uncontroversial. Do you have one?
No.
And I think an example is necessary.
Okay, yes. All right. So let's try to give an example.
So for that reason, we'll use Kant's example. According to Kant, when we add 2 plus 2 and get 4, the concept of the two 2's we added together are not contained within 4, basically. So this relationship between 2 and 2 and 4 is a synthetic one, because 4 does not contain the concept of 2. It contains 2 in the sense of if you add 2 to 2, you get 4. But if I just analyze my idea of what 4 is,
you're not going to analytically a priori find 2 and 2.
You'll get it synthetically a priori, is what he says.
Yes.
Right. So that's,
you may not agree with that, and that's okay.
He doesn't really elaborate on why that is.
No, he kind of just assumes it's obvious, is the impression I got.
Another similar example he uses later on is cause and effect. He thinks that we have the idea of cause and effect a priori, but cause and effect are two different things from each other.
Right, they're not contained within... some would argue that...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
You
exactly.
would argue.
Some would argue that none of these judgments are synthetic a priori. This is a controversial position, which is under-defended in the Critique of Pure Reason, and it's what a lot of scholarship focuses on, is this question of, are there actually synthetic a priori judgments? Kant seems to take it for granted almost. He gives a little bit of an argument. But what we mean here, just to be clear.
Oh, he does bring up as an example everything else. Oh, but that's even without... Okay, that's cool.
Yes.
I should write ahead.
Just to be really clear is those... It's obvious how I could have an analytic judgment a priori. If I have a concept, I simply examine my concept, and bada bing, bada boom, there's the judgment, right? I don't need any experience. No experience required. It is not obvious, to Kant anyway, how I could combine two different ideas necessarily without appealing to any kind of experience. How do I get there? That's the core problem.
That's what he's going to try to answer. The degree to which he successfully did that, like Patrick said, heavily debated on the scholarship. But this is like the point of like reading this book, right? You have to analyze for yourself how this is something. Because if this is true, this has huge implications, which I don't want to get into now because I feel like that would be getting too far away, and we still have the rest of the paragraph to read. So we'll save that for next time.
Yes.
But know that this is big and try to wrap it around your head. Even if you don't think it is the case now, just take it for the sake of the argument and follow its conclusions, and you'll see why it's interesting.
Go ahead, he's going to explain why this is a problem.
Yes.
If I am to go beyond the concept of A in order to cognize another B as combined with it, what is it on which I depend, and by means of which the synthesis becomes possible? Since I here do not have the advantage of looking around for it in the field of experience. Take the proposition, everything that happens has its cause. In the concept of something that happens, I think, to be sure, of an existence that was preceded by time. And from that analytic judgments can be drawn, e.g., that this exists in time, that it is a temporal occurrence, whatever. But the concept of cause lies entirely outside of that concept and indicates something different than the concept of what happens in general, and is therefore not contained in the latter representation at all. How then do I come to say something quite different about that which happens in general, and to cognize the concept of a cause as belonging to it, indeed necessarily, even though not contained in it? What is the unknown equals X here, on which the understanding depends, when it believes itself to discover beyond the concept of A a predicate which is foreign to it, yet which nevertheless believes to be connected with it? It cannot be experience, for the principle that has been adduced adds the latter representations to the former, not only with greater generality than experience can provide, but also with the expression of necessity, hence entirely a priori and from mere concepts. So, basically, to summarize that, a universal proposition like everything that happens has its cause, which is undoubtable according to Kant, and certain, cannot be drawn from experience because no matter how many repeated experiences you have, it's not going to apply universally. You don't know, there could always be an exception, etc., etc. Okay. So, now, the entire final aim of our speculative a priori cognition rests on such synthetic, i.e., ampliative principles. This is an even hotter take than the idea that there is synthetic judgment.
Yes, he's just going crazy with these.
He's saying that all of philosophy, basically, is synthetic a priori judgments. The analytic ones, basically, they just clarify things. They're logic. They're not important. So,
well,
they're important in order to keep things straight, in order to make a good judgment. But if we're actually making a claim, anything that people have actually disagreed with philosophically, for instance, it's all synthetic judgments, according to Kant. It's all of the differences, all of the dialectic, every difference between Plato, Aristotle, whatever, moral judgment, etc. All of that's synthetic. All of it is synthetic a priori.
I'm just trying to... Because I feel like he specifies, I can't remember if this is before or after, but he talks about like the big three things where it's like the soul, God, and like something else.
Yes, according to him, those are all synthetic a priori.
Right, but is that only what he's talking about? Like, is he really...
No, he's really talking about... He says that these are the most important concepts in philosophy.
Right.
But basically the whole of speculative reason, which is to say what we today call philosophy, logic excluded, is...
Like he says our speculative... Like the use of our makes me think like he's talking about those three things.
I think he's essentially talking about the tradition of philosophy.
Okay.
Or humanity, actually.
What?
I think he's talking about humanity in general.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a little nitpick. I'm not going to argue about this.
Actually, Lee had a thing about this where he said that the use of our and we and whatever, etc., is meant to imply that it could include extraterrestrials.
All right.
I mean,
leave it to the Kant scholar, I guess. But
well, Kant was pretty enthusiastic about this idea, but he was basically just saying that as conscious, limited, physical beings, etc., right?
phenomenal beings.
Yeah, exactly. Our speculative a priori cognition
Okay,
rests
so
on such
he's basically
synthetic.
talking about philosophy. You think? Okay,
Yes.
all right. I'm not gonna fight you on that. I'm
Right.
not like positive, but this is my first time hearing of this, so I'm just gonna take it and think about it and not cause a big debate that is unnecessary for the purposes of this.
Well, to elaborate, he says, and this is the last part.
yes.
For the analytics are, to be sure, most important and necessary, but only for attaining that distinctness of concepts which is a requisite for secure and extended synthesis as a really new acquisition.
Oh,
So
yes,
in
this
other
is
words,
another hot take.
yes, so in other words, we don't gain anything really new from analysis. We're simply clarifying what we already have,
Yeah.
which makes some sense, but the question is, couldn't people be drastically unclear to the point that we're disagreeing with each other and we would learn
and
significant
thus we
amount
lack
through the
knowledge.
clarification?
Yes.
This is a point of disagreement, I would
It
tend to
is,
have
although
with
it's not
Kant.
really core to Kant. Like, you can disagree with that and still take most of what he says about.
Not necessarily. So, for instance, I am leaning towards the idea that the concept of God
Mm-hmm.
is an analytic one. It's an analysis of our idea of the world in general, which is a necessary a priori concept, right? It's necessary that we believe that there is such a thing as a world.
Yes.
According to my reading of Spinoza and Hegel,
Mm-hmm.
more Spinoza.
Spinoza, I was gonna- I
Really,
was thinking-
it's
I didn't-
tentative.
I didn't want
It's
to bring it up.
tentative.
I didn't
It's
want to bring it up.
tentative. It's tentative, but I think it's going that way.
I didn't want to
be
bring up
honest.
Spinoza if you didn't, but
We're
here
just-
we go. Can is open.
We're just basically when we say when we think about the concept of the world, which is included a priori, and we analyze it, we find that it is God. So it's simply analytical. Now Kant actually
For
argues.
Spinoza, guys. If you're
Yes.
if you're confused.
Well,
Like-
it's not even just Spinoza; it's also for Occam.
well, for a lot of people, but I'm saying like that specific.
The ontological argument is an analytical one, or it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Kant will say that it's a synthetic one, and that's why it fails.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, the ontological argument is basically the idea that the concept of God includes God's existence, therefore
yes,
God
I remember
exists.
this. Okay.
It's
Been
it's
a few years
it's
since I've honestly
it's
encountered that, but yeah.
an odd one, and but it's more difficult to refute than you'd think it would.
No,
be.
it is. When I first like actually fully understood it, I was like, "Oh, that's powerful." I was like, "Okay." I mean, that had a lot of weird implications when I first
Yes.
found it, but that's not.
Well, the reason it's uncomfortable for people is because it seems to be analytical,
Well, no,
and it seems like we can't gain new
Yeah.
knowledge through analysis.
Oh, you're connecting that to that. Okay.
Yeah.
okay,
So what
okay.
people really say is you're just manipulating words. Well,
Yeah.
no, you're analyzing concepts.
Yeah, you're
But the-
defining words. Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea here is that, according to get way ahead of ourselves, Kant basically says you can't define concepts into existence because existence needs to be added to a concept synthetically.
Right, because he thinks, at least from I'm thinking of like a Hegelian thing where it's like, for Hegel that makes sense because it's like the concepts aren't pre-existing that we like come to. It's like we dialectically realize these, even a priori concepts, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas Kant thinks they're sort of just like already existing and we just have to uncover them, which is why he says we don't learn anything new, right? He's like, we just have to realize it, basically.
All that is really just to say that no, this isn't an aside. It's the core of Kant's. It's at the core of Kant's philosophy, and it's under-argued here.
Well, okay, I didn't mean that. I meant mainly for understanding, like, the part right now, like, understanding the difference
For
between
understanding it, yes.
Yes, that's what I was
You
trying
don't have to agree with it to understand it.
Yes, that's what I was trying.
true.
That's what I was trying.
That's
to get
definitely
at,
true.
yes,
And there's
but-
still things you can learn from it, even if you disagree with that premise.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at.
However,
but I mean, what we just said, I think, is
If you
helpful.
disagree with his idea that we don't really gain anything from
Yes.
analytic judgments and that synthetic a priori judgments exist, if you don't agree with that line of thinking, you're going to wind up disagreeing with Kant on a very basic, fundamental level.
Yes. So, but even if you're thinking that now, like I said, consider it for like I said, it's more of like for the sake of the argument thing. Like, granted, for now, for the sake of the argument, see where it goes. I promise you it gets interesting, even if you don't agree with all of it, and you'll have lots of things to consider. And all that will be coming up next time, as we have just finished the section, and we'll be moving on to more examples that aren't just examples. He's trying to make points about theoretical sciences, and he'll go on, especially the natural sciences, get especially controversial, but that will all be next time. So I hope you're in the mood for some controversy. We've got that coming up in section 5 and onwards. And yeah, hope you learned a lot. Yeah, that's pretty much brings to. I don't know. Do you have any closing thoughts, Patrick? Or I feel like we covered a lot of what we needed to.
Not really.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everyone. And we will see you next time in the next installment of the comprehensive study of critique of pure reason. Have a good one, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.